And I want to formally welcome all of you to our panel discussion, Monuments, Murals, and Memorials, which is a Western Neighborhoods Project panel discussion loosely moderated by myself, Executive Director Nicole Meldahl. And we have a truly incredible lineup of artists whom you see on the screen right now, you saw chatting earlier. We have Cheyenne Concepcion, we have Ben Davis, we have Lisa Escobedo, we have Dana King, and we have, last but not least, Ben Wood. So let me just check in and make sure that we have, yeah, I think we have enough to kind of move forward. How do our panelists feel?
Ready when you are.
Excellent. All right, well then, let's get the not fun stuff out of the way, which is sort of some general housekeeping. So first, this is a Zoom webinar, which means all of our attendees won't be able to speak during the program. I apologize for that, but we do want to hear from you. So please ask questions, please talk to each other and be part of the discussion via the chat. I'll be monitoring that more than the Q question and answer kind of bubble. So get in the chat, talk to each other and have fun. And I'll also pass any questions that you put into the chat on to our panelists for you. And second is a very polite reminder that we need to be polite this evening. And I shouldn't have to say this, but I'm going to anyways, because public art and history conjure really strong emotions, which is what we love to see as practitioners in both of these fields. But all respectful viewpoints are welcome here. And this is a safe space for dialogue that I'm excited to be able to provide for all of you. And if you're chatting with someone who has different views, please remember that your words do have weight, they do have power. Refrain from personalizing any comments. No one should feel attacked here for their beliefs. And let's definitely focus on what we can do together, what we can be with each other here and now. And let's try not to focus on what's beyond our control and what's already come and gone. So let's remember that we're all here for the same reason, which is that we love San Francisco and we're excited to be able to tell her story. And then last but not least, this program is being recorded and will be available on the Western Neighborhoods Project YouTube channel as soon as we're humanly able to get it up there. And I'll be sending you a link to this channel in a follow-up email that will also have a survey that if you'll please fill that out, it does help us improve our programs going forward. So then really quickly, I'll give you a roadmap for the evening. Oh, I'm sorry. We're gonna do a land acknowledgement first. Just have a moment to reflect on where we are. So without further ado, we acknowledge that the Western Neighborhoods Project Home for History in the Richmond District and the works that we'll be discussing this evening sit on the unceded ancestral homeland of the Ramaytush Ohlone, who are the original peoples of the San Francisco Peninsula. And we recognize that we benefit from living and working on their traditional homeland, and we affirm their sovereign rights as First Peoples. So, and this, by the way, is a very early photo of Lake Merced. It's one of my favorite from the collection. So thank you everyone for that. And here's how our evening will be structured. We'll be doing some quick introductions to all of our illustrious panelists. Right after I give you a quick elevator pitch for the organization, because that's what they pay me to do. Then we'll provide a little bit of historical context, and our panelists will delve into their related works, beginning with Ben Wood and the controversial WPA murals at George Washington High School, then into the statues that were toppled in Golden Gate Park just over a year ago, and the work Cheyenne and Annalisa are doing to conceptualize new monuments. And finally, a closer look at the Francis Scott Key Monument and the incredible intervention Dana and Ben Davis have just installed around it called Monumental Reckoning, which you heard us chatting about earlier. This was unveiled last weekend. It was incredible, and I can't wait to go see it again. So don't forget to go wild in the chat, which I'll be monitoring on the side over here. And a reminder to our panelists to just jump in and discuss things as they come up as well. So let's get our elevator pitch for Western Neighborhoods Project out of the way. Western Neighborhoods Project is a 501c3 California nonprofit that's preserved, interpreted, and share the diverse history and culture of San Francisco's West Side since 1999. And you can see all the things we do on our primary platform, which is outsidelands.org. That's where you can find more event listings like this. You can find our weekly podcast, articles and photos, and a community chat room and videos. We do a whole lot for a teeny tiny nonprofit. And in support of that work in 2014, we launched an auxiliary program called Open SF History, which is an online archive of over 53,000 historical images, which are all mapped for your convenience and identified by a small army of volunteers. So if you really want to go down a rabbit hole after this over a glass of wine, want to find what your house looks like, maybe what your high school looked like, I highly suggest going to opensfhistory.org. And if you'd like, you can come down to the office, which you see behind me. We have our new exhibition of acquisitions from the Cliff House Collection on view, and our open hours are Thursday through Saturday, 11 through 4 p.m. So, going alphabetically, mostly, I'd like to introduce our first artist of the evening, Cheyenne Concepcion. And I had the distinct honor of working with her in some of her projects over the last year. And we got on the phone together and we knew we were just both on the same wavelength. So her work is incredible and I'm so excited we're able to feature her today. Welcome, Cheyenne.
Thank you, Nicole, and thank you for creating this space for us today in this moment of time. I'm Cheyenne Concepcion, and I'm an artist and designer based in the Mission. I work across installation, social practice, textile, and public art. And ultimately, my work is about place. And place is physical, right? But it's also mental and spiritual and political, and places full of myth. And my work and all the projects I do really try to unpack that myth. I think the reason why I'm here today is a project very much rooted in San Francisco that kind of evolved over the last 2 years. I'm excited to talk about it a little bit more in full later. But first, I guess I'll go through my slides. This project is from 2018. It's a project called Borderlands Archive. It's a project it's a conceptual archive project where I collect donated objects that have crossed borders and kind of archive them and uplift them as pieces of history. So it's kind of a research project, a renegade archive, and this is an installation of it in New York at Parsons School of Design, where we kind of treated these 3 objects that crossed the Tijuana San Diego border in 2018 as historical artifacts with personal stories from the contributors. Next slide. This project is in YBCA. It's called New Monuments Must, and it was projected for 3-ish months on the side of YBCA's building as part of the San Francisco Urban Film Festival. And this project kind of summarizes research and demands that we created and recommendations to the city about what new monuments should and could look like. The project, we'll go into it a little bit later when we talk about new monuments, but the project solicited San Francisco residents about what they want to see in new monuments, kind of building off the 2020 uprisings and different things happening in the city. We gathered over 100 responses to our survey, and then from there kind of created some demands and recommendations for what future monuments could look like. And this is a GIF, but I guess it's not playing. Sorry if I sent you the wrong format, Nicole, but so this is more of a film kind of moving image project that you could view on my website if you're interested. Next slide. And this is a monumental scale project I just completed last week. It's also at YBCA, and it's a project called Triumph of a Woman. It's a public art installation that is primarily textile. So it's a textile sculpture that I'm using to kind of honor a story from my childhood, from my grandmother. She grew up in a fishing village outside of Manila, and it talks about a story of her adventurous and playful spirit. And I kind of am commenting on this idea of triumph as a common theme within monuments, because triumph is often monumentalized, and the triumph of men and the triumph of industry or military achievements are often kind of monumentalized. And I wanted to monumentalize and memorialize a really humble personal family story in a very soft and kind of ephemeral way. So this is an example of how I'm thinking about monuments right now. And I think that's my last slide.
It is, Cheyenne. Thank you so much for being here today. And we'll get into more of Cheyenne's work in a minute, but first, next we have Lisa Escobedo, who I had the pleasure of working with. We're California Historical Society alumna, and I'm so excited to be featuring her again today. Welcome, Lisa.
Thank you, Nicole. Again, Lisa Escobedo here. Some quick background on me. Born and raised in South Central in LA. I moved to San Francisco back in 2008, actually to try to find an education in life. Also to move, get out of where I came from and just grow. Next slide. A lot of the work that I do and is actually came from doing tattoo work in San Francisco. And then from tattoo work, I found myself working with Precita Eyes in the Mission, and from Precita Eyes restoring murals and painting murals, to where it led to me being one of the co-founders of Calle 24 Latino Cultural District that was blessed and recognized back in May of 2014, same day as my graduation in college. The Board of Supervisors and the mayor officially established the cultural district. And we, as you can see, this is a map of how big our district is in the Mission. It's basically all 24th Street. And one of the ways is also in alignment with monuments and recognition of public works, is like recognizing that you are stepping into the Latino cultural district, where a lot of our people have been gentrified out. Next slide. One of the works I do, again, mural restoration work I do. I've worked on the Women's Building. I worked on St. Peter's Church, 500 Years of Resistance. But one of the other works I've done is bringing back Fiesta de las Americas. This will be the 4th year coming up, but the festival, as a beautiful, good friend from the Friends of the San Francisco Public Library found this beautiful poster of 1988 of Fiesta de las Americas, an original. And this photograph is actually of 2016's festival when we brought this back. Next slide. Along with that, along with my work at Calle 24, we actually restored the 29 flags of Fiestas de las Americas. So we have a good friend of mine, Yano Rivera, who we work with Precita Eyes, who came in, and you're welcome to walk up and down 24th Street, and you'll be able to see every flag representing the Latin American diaspora. Next slide. The most recent project, I had the honor of actually doing a mural last year, no, 2019. And this is the Alto Fuego mural. It was with Precita Eyes, but also with homies and Mission neighborhoods and Calle 24. And this is a mural of an altar honoring people who've been victims of police brutality. And then it's not just me, we have other artists who I featured here in the photograph. So just in the nutshell, I do a little bit of everything, art and imagery, but I also love tangible and intangible arts, and I'm not afraid to get on a wall and either create new work or protect old work that is for the community. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Lisa. And next we have Ben Davis, who you might not know it, but he's literally illuminating your lives as San Franciscans from every corner of the city. So welcome, Ben.
Thank you. Why don't you just pull my image down? I'll just go screen.
You got it.
Thanks. First of all, Lisa, that's amazing. I had no idea that you were doing all that. That is beautiful. That's really, really amazing work. Wow. You know, it's very interesting that I'm on this panel because I wasn't thinking about monuments. We were creating monumental scale work. And I sort of look at the work we do because it's a very, you know, Dana can talk about it, but it's a very pure process. We just bring integrity, we turn away sort of corporate influence, and we just try and stimulate this culture of generosity to make amazing projects happen. The mission statement of the organization is literally illuminate rallies large groups of people together to create impossible works of public art that through awe free humanity's better nature. So it's sort of a spiritual journey, and in a way what we're doing is working to augment the spiritual infrastructure of the city, these pieces that lift you up. So I'm not really interested in showing you any of my work, because in truth, the work that I do is all the invisible work. It's the manifestation of others at the end of the day that really makes the difference in these things. But the work, you know, the Bay Lights is certainly a monumental expression. That's the first sort of visitation that I had, that the bridge could be a canvas of light, and you know, sort of overcame the fear of the idea. It scared me and walked into the love of it. And 2.5 years later, I met the artist Leo Villarreal, you know, bend permissions at Caltrans, technologists solve problems that hadn't been really addressed before. How do you spread pixels out like that? And we attracted resources that no one was planning on spending and crossed all those impossible hurdles, and the Bay Lights was born. And while we had high hopes for it, it just exceeded our highest dreams. It wasn't just about getting people to see the Bay Bridge again. It actually changed the energy of the waterfront. And for everyone on this call, I mean, I get these, if you're a San Franciscan, a lot of us have that moment, the first moment that you saw it, when your family has come to town, you've brought them there. It's entered our lives in a different emotional way. It was really powerful. And I ended up shutting down a successful 20-year design and communication firm, took my 3x pay cut for the honor of doing something I'm not qualified to do at all, which is run an arts nonprofit. And so Illuminate was born. And we've worked on other projects that, you know, the Conservatory of Flowers, the Summer of Love installation that now shines nightly, and I think is changing usage patterns, and actually has unintendedly created sort of an economic revival. Visitation in the daytime is up 300%, membership is up 700%. And so it's created new possibilities for a very 144-year-old or whatever it is, or institution in the park. The work up on the Twin Peaks right now, the Pink Triangle, is super fascinating, building on Patrick Carney's 26-year history of putting a canvas triangle up there over Pride weekend, what he calls a renegade craft project. In fact, it's kind of interesting whether, you know, our projects, I think I always think it's interesting that it's a conversation, although it's always a boring conversation, is what we are creating really art? Like, I don't really care. As long as it creates an energetic ripple that moves through the city, I'm satisfied as can be. So the Pink Triangle will be shining for the entire month of Pride this year. It went live on June 1st, and it will go dark after June 30th. And the hope is that it comes back on the regular, so that you don't have to remember when Pride Month is. There'll be a reminder in the sky, this big pink triangle that shows up. And the other work typically what we do is just sort of sit in a space and understand it. Invitations have come to work all over the world, but have turned them all down with the intention of just going deep in the place that we live, building community, and creating an energetic shift that you know, people can come to understand, to bring the message back out into the world. And the Music Concourse is one of those places that was, people who know it, I mean, it's sort of magical, and yet it's clearly been dormant for about a century, you know, underutilized. There's the Temple of Music in the Music Concourse, a place that you never hear music. And so last year, as part of the Golden Gate Park's 150th, we redid the stage, and we brought in an in-place lighting and sound system that makes this place a radically accessible performance. A newly designed stage that gets, first time it's ever, it's ADA accessible. There's no more sort of places for people to hang out. So it's cleaner in general, and it's gonna be stunning. You got a taste of it when we debuted Dana's work on Friday last week. The words above my head, if you're all seeing that, are superimposed for now, but that is Lift Every Voice, the quote from James Weldon Johnson, who wrote that quote the same year the Spreckles Temple of Music opened in 1900. Those are the first few words of what is considered the Black national anthem, has been for the last 100 years. And as I've been thinking about this space, I've always been attracted to that what they call the frieze on top as a place to bring energy and intention to the stage below. And after Floyd was murdered, whatever that tectonic shift was that we all were part of and hope stays in us and makes a genuine transformation, I began looking at a series of quotes and reading Maya Angelou and Toni Morrison and James Baldwin, and Dana knows she's suffered through all my readings of these things. Audre Lorde. It was this song from my childhood that you actually used to announce the end of the black radio station going off the air, WILD in Boston. They would play Lift Every Voice and Sing. And those 5 words were really cool, but when it just knocked down a 3 in my head, it energetically lit up. And as I was imagining it, walking it back from fountain to fountain to fountain, finally sitting on a monument on that big piece of marble, knowing about this song, realizing that James Weldon Johnson was actually born 1871 and his birthday was on around Juneteenth. And then it just hit me that, wait, this is the Black national anthem, this is the national anthem. It got pulled down. I'm super confused. Why did it get pulled down? I mean, I'm not forgiving a slaveholder, but shit, that's a tough bar for all history. But let me look it up. And right there, as I sat there, I saw the deeper history of Key. Described Africans in America as an inferior race and the greatest evil to afflict any community. He fights the abolitionists. He supports Southern, as Dana has put it so beautifully. He supported the business of slavery through his life, which he benefited from. And so I checked around with a bunch of other folks, and eventually I found my way to Dana King. And I told her the story of the space, and I said, Dana, I have this idea that, James Weldon Johnson, who turns 150 on Juneteenth, 1 year after the statue came down, maybe you could put one of your beautiful sculptures of him inside this plinth. That was 4.5 months ago, that conversation. I emailed Dana on January 31st, and she responded quickly, and we had a Zoom call the next day. I was in Baja, she was in Oakland, and I told her this idea, and she said, can I bring a wrecking ball? And I said, uh-oh, talk to me. So, and I was just gonna say on Friday, for those who were in the park, Mayor Breed was there, Poet Laureate Tongo Eisen Martin was there, Martin Luther McCoy was performing, the space was alive, Radessa Jones was the MC,
Hold on, Ben, we're getting ahead of ourselves.
Oh, okay, well then I'll just cut off, I'm sorry, I thought this was it. I'm going on way too long.
No.
Ladies and gentlemen, Dana King.
No, you know what? We actually had a request for folks wanted to see your projects too, people who haven't seen them. So really quickly, I'm going to do the thing you didn't want me to do, which is, and I should say before we move forward that all of the background images that you'll see behind the presenters today, or anything you see on screen, those are from our Open SF History Archive, and they're chosen thoughtfully. So this is actually the Spreckles Temple of Music under construction in 1899 behind Ben's giant profile. But we have examples of his work. So this is for Lava, who asked for this in the chat. We have the Conservatory of Flowers, which, I mean, to be honest, Ben, I had no idea that you had this much reach. You've literally shed light on so many things throughout the city. And then here's the Bay Lights that he was talking about. So thank you, Ben.
Sorry, apologies.
Now we'll move into Dana, who will give just a brief background of her work prior to Monumental Reckoning.
Well, thank you so much, Nicole. I'm very happy to be here to have this conversation. It's very important, not just to me because I'm a sculptor, but I think to everyone who comes upon art in the public arena accidentally or intentionally. For me, I would like the learning to be the same. I would like it to be educational. I would like people to experience the type of art that I do, and become curious about their own family history and dig certainly deeper into American history, because we have been taught, if little, what we've been taught are lies. when it comes to African descendants and many other people of color and their history and existence here in this country. This is William Lanson, who stands in New Haven, Connecticut. He was a free Black man in the 1800s who built out New Haven's infrastructure. He built out their Long Wharf, he built out the canal, he hired free and enslaved African descendants to help him and Native Americans. And he built community for them as well. He built the first hotel, first integrated neighborhood in New Haven. But what I found, certainly on the install, was that nobody knew who he was. Nobody knew his story. And they're learning it now. I met with the entire New Haven Police Department on their all call while I was there, and encouraged them to use Mr. Lanson, because standing behind him is a long green space that runs into the African American community there, and the kids don't feel welcome in New Haven. They don't feel welcome anywhere near Yale. And I encourage the police department to use Mr. Lanson and to strike up conversations with kids and take them over to see him and talk about him. I told them his entire history. And because I love my work and I visit it on a regular basis, I will be going back to New Haven to check in to see if that is actually happening. So I'm a sculptor of public work. I create Black bodies in bronze. And I create these Black bodies in bronze because representation is vital. African descendants and other people of color deserve to see their histories in the public sphere. I want kids to see the work and look and say, you know what, that looks like my grandpa, or that, my goodness, it looks like my aunt, or he or she looks like me. So this person who is honored with sculpture must have been important. Yeah, I must be important too. My people are important to the history of America beyond slavery. Yes, it's how we came, but that is not how we have stayed. We are a resilient and strong people. And I want my work to reflect that in the heroines and heroes of our history. And our history is American history. So it's all of our history. When so Mr. Lanson was my most recent installation in September of 2020. My next installation will be Dr. Huey P. Newton in West Oakland. It'll be the first acknowledgement of the Panthers in the city of Oakland, where they began. And I worked with his widow, Frederica. She shared stories of Huey, and he's still all over my studio. We laughed and we cried, and it helped to bring him to life. I'm sorry?
That's one of the things I love most about history and art is you get to live with these people who have left us for another extended length of time.
Right, right. We laughed, we cried. She told me stories I can't tell you. but maybe I'll tell you at the dedication. Maybe that'll be October 24th. But research is fundamental to my work. It's very important for me to know as much about the person that I've been invited to create, and because they come through the piece, and that moment may take a while. With Huey, it took a long time because my studio was packed with former Panthers. People miss him, they love him, and he was a complicated man, but to have him back in West Oakland will be, it's my gift. All of this is my gift to the Black community, to Black people, to our history. And I want to before I hand it off, I want to say to Ben, you called me, and the first thing I said to you when you invited me to to see if I was interested to create a piece of James Weldon Johnson on that plinth, I said to you, no, I not only will not, I cannot, because there's an energetic in all of this work that sits around every city in this country that was created to exclude people. It was created to harm people. It was created to intimidate people. And I would never want any of my work anywhere near a site like that on it, because it still resonates with that same hateful energy. And then I said, after you asked me, okay, well, what would you do? I said, I'd hire a wrecking ball. But then, and then we eventually got around to whatever. But, energy is felt, it's experienced, and it lasts as long as the materials last. Which is also why I create in bronze, because they can last for hundreds of years. And then that means the story is told generation to generation to generation as well. So I'll talk about monumental reckoning when we come upon it, but it's been like a dream.
Thank you, Dana. And that's a great point. We're all engaged in the process of storytelling, right? That's the one walkthrough that connects all of our work. And without further ado, I want to introduce our last but not least artist, Ben Wood, who without him, this panel absolutely would not have happened. So thank you for being my partner and my schemer and dreamer in so many more things than just this.
Well, thank you. Yeah, what a tough act to follow that is. So a little bit about me. I'm a site-specific, site-engaged artist. I create art about people and place, using projection art and media to interrogate urban fabric, urban structures, symbolic structures. Really trying to delve into, like Dana said, the stories, unknown or underrepresented stories of places. This is a projection that I did in last year in Times Square. It's a reprisal of a project I did to animate the Rivera mural of the Art Institute. The original piece I created in 2002 was created in situ opposite the mural as a 3D animation, which would be a contemporary digital twin in the space to encourage the viewer to reconsider the relationship with the mural. All too often, we're blissfully unaware of or choose to ignore the messages embedded within murals and monuments. You can go to the next slide. Another early video projection onto Coit Tower in 2004. This was initially prompted by my bewilderment around the statue of Columbus. As someone that's not from the United States originally, I was a little confused as to why Columbus was there. I thought, should we not be honoring the indigenous people who were here before the Europeans? So I chose on July 4th and on Thanksgiving in 2004 and 2008 to create a series of projections, which I sought to honor the local contemporary Ohlone people by projecting images of their ancestors and contemporary video of Ohlone leaders. And the message was, we are still here. You can go to the next slide. This is a projection a few years ago. I'm often intrigued by buildings, which might be repeatedly speaking to me. Sometimes I pay attention, sometimes I don't. This is the Temple of Quantai, which is in Mendocino. It's built in the 1850s. I worked with the family, the descendants of the people that had, the descendants of Chinese fishermen who landed in Mendocino in 1854. And I worked with the family to project a series of photographs around town, who have been, and the family have been, and their ancestors have been part of the community into the present day, despite waves of anti-Chinese immigration laws. Their story is still relatively unknown, even in the community of Mendocino. And so on Chinese New Year and other another event, I projected images of the family onto the temple and onto water towers around the town. You can go to the next slide. This is the present day. History, like the ephemerality of my projection, is temporal. It's constantly changing. On the left is an impromptu projection I did recently a couple months ago with the Petro Archives project at the Great Gatehouse power station in March. The Gatehouse was part of the Spreckles sugar factory, so it's relevant to this conversation. Shortly before we did this projection, the Gatehouse was demolished, so our projection itself was ended up as a temporary memorial of sorts, recalling portraits of some of the mostly working class Irish families of Irish Hill who had worked there. And on the right, this is a piece that I currently have up on weekends, Thursday, Friday, Saturday, Sunday, on view above Christopher's book. So I've been working with Peter Linenthal of the Petro History Archives to share the personal faces of history. These photographs were found a couple months ago in a basement on Petro Hill, and are of a family who resided there from the 1880s to the 1960s. And you can go to the next slide. Last year, in the aftermath of the monuments coming down, I too began to consider how to respond artistically. Here are some of the series of renderings I created, in particularly focusing on two monuments embroiled in controversy, those from the bequest of James Lick, the Pioneer Monument and the Francis Scott Key Monument. I began to consider how can we create temporary artworks to engage with the monuments. On the left, you'll see the Pioneer Monument temporarily shrouded in a Christo Jean-Claude-like installation. And on the right, you'll see a scaffold embedded with media interrogating the Scott Key Monument, much like the work of Christoph Wodiczko. So the idea would be have media visualizations, images embedded within that scaffold. I also created a music box, which is a lenticular printed music box. So this could be temporarily placed. This is a mock-up, obviously, contemporary placed onto or adjacent to the pedestal of the monument that would be presenting a multi-layered rotating music box that presents both the history of the monument through alternative views and moments in time. Monuments need to become multi-dimensional, both in time and space. It could also, so I've got alternative, potential alternative people on that. This is a mock-up, but the idea is it's lenticular. So when it moves, I don't know if you can see that, you'll see different images. It doesn't translate so well on the video.
We can see it, Ben, don't worry.
You get the idea. So that's it.
Yeah, before we move in, we'll talk about the Washington High murals next, and Ben, you'll hear more from Ben, but I'm gonna stop the share really fast because we have a couple great questions in the chat, and I think it'd be a good opportunity for all of you to respond. So first of all, a while back, Maggie asked, with schools like the San Francisco Art Institute, Mills, CCA, struggling heavily on existing and operating and making what they do known to the world, how do you all as artists and how do we as historians illuminate these spaces that need spotlights, but also they need to be recognized for the murals and monuments and memorials that exist in them? So what can we do? What do you think we can do, team?
Well, I have an idea. Can I respond?
Of course.
I've thought about this because I'm an alumnus of the Art Institute. And a project that I would love to engage in, there was recently a debate around the Art Institute fresco by Diego Rivera, which many people don't know is now 90 years old. It turned 90 years old last month. I would like to, again, reprise the project that I did in 2002 with contemporary alumni to talk about some of the issues within the mural, to animate it and engage with the community and the school. That's a project that I've considered doing, haven't yet moved forward with it, but that's my brief answer.
How about anyone? No pressure, everyone, but It's interesting to hear from a historical preservation perspective what they're trying to do, which is remove some of these murals there at UCSF too, and the enormous cost behind removing these murals and installing them somewhere else. And then you look at SF MoMA and they did it like that, no problem. Do we think that murals intended for a certain space actually work when they're pulled out of their environment?
Well, considering the financial distress that these institutions are experiencing, I would like to see the pieces stay there and be used to as an investment vehicle, if you will, for those institutions that people can not have any ownership of, but they can generously donate on behalf of those creative pieces that forever, that will help to keep these institutions alive. I mean, we're losing them. Mills is going away.
Yeah.
SFAI, here comes my grandson, hang on. You know, they even spoke of selling the Diego Rivera. Thank you, sir. My grandson is here with art for grandma that he likes to put inside of a cone like a flower. That's all this art in there. So thank you, sir. I'm talking. Okay, bye. He's my studio assistant, actually. But you know, they talked about selling the Diego Rivera. I'm like, you cannot do that. So, I mean, and there are other ways to encourage artists to enliven those pieces as well. I think about Jet Martinez, who is who's a muralist here in the Bay and lives in Oakland. And he was born in the same town as Diego Rivera, always wanted to be a muralist and is a renowned, world-renowned muralist. And I think of people who this work inspires. And I believe it deserves to be seen in the space where it was created. Just some thoughts.
I think the same way. I think that art created for a specific environment loses some of its impact when it's removed from that environment, and that, yeah, we should totally have these organizations, if they're able to stay around, leverage the assets that these incredible pieces are. We had one of our comments said that the Rivera mural was actually already in movable panels at CCSF, which is why it was so easy to move to MoMA. So thank you for that.
I will add, it was actually restored, and it was pretty embedded into the walls, but SF MoMA has been working on that project to get that over since we were at CHS, Nicole.
A million years ago.
It was a good at least 3 years or more. So it has been a long conversation that we're seeing it come into fruition right now. So things, I don't know if everybody else has experienced, but things sometimes do take a momentum in the back that a lot of people don't see until it's the end product. And that's, I want to also talk about that with murals. Murals have a process where, especially if it's a community mural, there's a lot of conversation that happens all the way to like, where is it going to go? Where is this art going to go? Do we have a wall? Who owns the wall? And like acknowledging the different people who are putting a stake in it. And a lot of times you don't see it until towards the end when the mural is finished. But just to also acknowledge that, yeah, that process for SF MoMA and Diego Rivera mural has been a long waited one. And I'm sure everybody can agree all of our projects doesn't do that.
Except Monumental Reckoning, which came together in rapid fire speed. And Ben Wood, you also work insanely fast. But we'll get into that. We'll get into that, I promise. I guess we should, to keep the momentum moving forward, I'm going to share screen again and we'll talk a little bit about some controversial murals at George Washington High School, which were also a WPA era mural set painted by Victor Arnautoff. I'll give you a little bit of background, not too much. I'm not going to hit you over the head heavily with history, but Arnautoff is Russian by birth. He was practicing in San Francisco from about 1925 through 1963. And for folks who don't know, George Washington High School is actually in the Richmond district. It was painted in 1936, and if you want to see more of Arnautoff's work, I bet you already have if you've been to Coit Tower or the chapel in the Presidio. And his work at George Washington High School actually includes 13 different panels, which totals over 1,600 feet. It's actually one of the largest collections of WPA art on the West Coast. And it was meant as a critique of Washington and Manifest Destiny. And that's not my opinion, that's according to Professor Emeritus Bob Cherney, who wrote a book titled Victor Arnautoff and the Politics of Art. Here's one of the panels in George Washington High School. And that means the mural shows slavery. It shows white settlers stepping over a dead Native American. He was a practicing communist who taught at Stanford at the time. And his depictions of Washington as a slave owner who annihilated the original inhabitants of the New World was absolutely radical for its time. And to be honest, it's still a narrative that's quite controversial. And some argue that Arnautoff's intentions don't matter when you're faced with this incredibly brutal artwork that's totally uninterpreted for the most part. Ultimately, there's an argument over whether or not this is appropriate for a high school. Because while some people see subversive art and maybe alternative history, others see the glorification of a traumatic past that's perhaps desensitizing for the young people who walk by it every day, and worst case scenario is actually traumatizing for these kids. So we're talking about them now because in June of 2019, the San Francisco School Board actually voted to paint over the murals as antithetical to the school's values of social justice. And there was immediate public pushback. So they scaled it back. They're no longer going to overpaint them. They're just going to cover them up. But there's still an ongoing debate about this. And people who want them removed because they're showing history from a colonizer's perspective. And the people who want them to stay, a group that's most vocal about this is the George Washington High Alumni Association. They think that removing them is actually erasing history. And they actually filed a lawsuit to prevent this from happening. We'll see where that goes. And they have a pretty impressive background or impressive supporters, all the way from Danny Glover to a former art curator from the Fine Arts Museums, and even someone from Presida I's Muralist Association. So there's a lot of people who want it to go. There's a lot of people who want them to stay. And this conversation also is not new. Students actually protested the murals in the 1960s, calling them inhumane, and the Arts Commission responded by commissioning this mural by Dewey Crumpler, who was then a student at the San Francisco Art Institute, now a professor. And he painted this response mural called Multi-Ethnic Heritage. And it's interesting, they interviewed a current teacher at Washington High School, said most of the students there actually want the murals to stay, but they do admit that they're offensive and something needs to get done with it. So the kids are involved in this conversation. And also Crumpler wants the pieces to stay, wants both murals to stay in order to deal with what he calls the discomfort of history as a necessary part of history. And he does advocate for better interpretation though, which was actually part of what was supposed to happen in the 1960s when the protests were happening, but never actually did. And so Ben Wood is going to give us his concepts for how we can better interpret this, starting with a video. Do you want to explain it first, Ben?
Yeah, I'll explain. So, so the Board of Education, sadly, in my opinion, sadly hasn't considered alternatives to the concealing of the George Washington High School murals, of which there are many potential possibilities. There are many affirming opportunities to animate and give context to the murals that will bring diverse perspectives, viewpoints, and histories. For example, you can play this in a moment. Here is the Maori artist, Lisa Escobedo, who reclaimed a colonial era wallpaper depicting the meeting of Captain Cook and Pacific Islanders. I got to see this in Honolulu. And then here in San Francisco at the De Young in 2019, she recorded many Indigenous participants presenting an Indigenous viewpoint rather than Eurocentric version of history. We're gonna play a little clip.
Okay. Yes, we are. I just learned how to do this.
So this was a monumental, I don't know, 70 feet wide projection screen that was presented in the Design Museum in 2019. I believe conducted it over a number of years. Many islands recording predominantly indigenous. I think it's a 45-minute movie. So one of my ideas is that one could create a series of projects in murals with other video artwork that allow multiple and so we can move to the next one. So here is some of my own concepts that could augment the murals, much like Rihanna's work. Here's a pretty crude, but trying to illustrate the idea. A projected artwork projected onto or adjacent to the murals through video and sound could juxtapose historic or contemporary Native figures in conversation with the life of Washington murals. Of course, this would be led by and collaboration with Indigenous artists. These examples are intended to show the potential power of artists and designers to come up with creative solutions that can possibly reconcile differing opinions and views. You can go to the next one.
We talk so much about the layers of history, Ben, not to keep you from moving forward, but that's what I love about both of the Ben's projection work and the light work that you do is you're adding so many more layers onto landscapes that are already there. All right, I'll keep you moving forward, Ben.
Thank you. So here's a more unobtrusive interpreted signage could be situated in front of the murals. The panels will provide interpretive text in order to give contemporary viewers a framework for reinterpreting elements of the mural through contemporary understanding. Both textual and graphic information could provide context to the murals and could be augmented by an audio guide which visitors listen via phone stations. There's something like this. There was something like this in the Presidio. For example, a Native American might share how our ancestors' traditional lifeways were destroyed by colonialism, which is not illustrated in the mural. You can go to the next slide. So here's a relatively simple approach, which is augmenting. You can play it, Nicole.
Okay.
Actually, no. Can you go to the next one first?
Sure.
Yeah, that one. Here's a relatively simple approach, which is augmenting the mural with text. This could be done physically with a barrier onto or adjacent, near the mural, or virtually with the app. I created this simple app in which the user points their phone at a specific panel of the mural and it dissects and translates portions of the mural. This is much like at the Museum of Natural History in New York, in which a diorama was encouraging the viewer to understand why the mural may present only one view of history from the lens of one specific artist. And again, I just wanted to say that these are concepts. They're not a final product. They're maquettes. They're prototypes, and they're my my attempt to show the possibility of presenting alternative views that would keep the murals in view and interpret them, augment them with media art. So you can go to the next one if you like.
Oh, you mean the prior?
The previous one.
Okay.
One. So yeah, this is basically what I did as another augmented version, which the mural is animated in front of you. I've animated one panel of the mural. The viewer would point their phone at the mural, and faces within in the mural could be animated with.
We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all humans are created equal, that we are endowed with certain.
I took the UN Declaration of Indigenous Rights and I had them recite it. Obviously, that that is not. Did it stop?
I stopped it because it's quite loud and we can't actually hear you over it.
Okay, why don't you play it?
Okay.
I'll talk afterwards.
Also, you should know it startled me the first time I listened to it. I literally jumped out of my seat. It was so loud. But anyways, yes. Okay, here we go.
Unalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. We indigenous peoples are free and equal to all others and have the right to be free from any kind of discrimination.
We can stop it. So basically the idea would be to animate the mural with alternative points of view and dialogue to create dialogue around this history of the mural. So and finally, I just wanted to end up by saying that, as demonstrated by the talent and creativity in our panel, we have the creative capital and resources here in San Francisco, and hopefully we can respond in a forward-thinking and inclusive and creative ways to such problems. If you'd like to check out more of the proposals or ideas, you could check out repurposethemurals.com, and I can put that in the chat. Thank you.
Great. And we have, I'll stop share. We have a couple comments in the chat that are really great. Someone said that they love the idea of layering projection upon existing murals and monuments. And they're also imagining the possibility of a translucent screen that could be hung in front of a mural to reduce the visibility of the older imagery and give greater emphasis to the contemporary interpretations, which could serve twofold, right?
That was actually one of my mock-ups that you might see online. I didn't share them all because it was just overload, but yes, that was one of the ideas that I thought of.
So we're on the same page, which is wonderful to hear. And also we have a question to all the panelists. So in New York City, they just announced that they're going to remove the Teddy Roosevelt statue in front of the Natural History Museum. And Howard is wondering your thoughts on that.
See ya.
And next slide.
What's going up? Who's gonna hold space? Who deserves to be there? Who needs to be there?
I love it, Annalisa. That's exactly all the questions we need to be asking, right?
And who will they talk with? Who will the museum speak with in order to come up with that answer? Which is a large part of why Monumental Reckoning is where it is, because those conversations were happening without folks that look like us at the table, and so it's one thing to take it down, but like Annalisa says, what is the plan? What is the plan?
I'd also love to see a concise expression of why. It's important to know the why. That it's down is information. The why is what matters, right? Why are we doing this? And I think, working on that so it's a way that people can understand it in their being is important. So I'd like to see that language.
Yeah, I mean, monuments like these are coming down across the country, right? Confederate monuments are getting the most attention because there's a lot of discussion about racism in the country right now, pointed at the Confederacy. But I think the biggest mistake that people can do is disappear them in the middle of the night. I know governments don't want to have the controversy, they don't want to deal with the pushback, so they just try to make it disappear. But I totally hear you, Ben and Annalise, everybody here, that I wish that we could have like a deeper conversation about why they're getting removed so that folks feel heard and that the right thing goes back in its place. That seems to not be happening all the time.
They actually kind of did. The Theodore Roosevelt Monument in New York was a case study monument that the mayoral committee, which is a process that we're kind of going through now in San Francisco, it was one of their case study monuments that they didn't know what to do with. Their original recommendation was to just move it to a different location that was less controversial, maybe Central Park or something. And that's kind of spurred a lot of uproar within the community for obvious reasons. And I'm happy to hear that it's actually going down, but I know it's been a process since 2017 to do something with that monument. So it's just interesting as a parallel to what our city government is trying to go through at the moment. So
let me tell you, after studying the history of so many monuments in San Francisco and how they've been gifted to the city's answer is constantly, I don't know, let's put it in the park. What are we gonna do with it? Just shove it in Golden Gate Park, it'll be fine. Glad to know that that happens everywhere. And it's interesting, I was reading into some of the ideas for what to do with monuments. So the city's going through a process where they're figuring out how to assess the monuments here in San Francisco. I think Dana, you're potentially going to be on a committee that's in charge of that. Fingers crossed.
That's what we wish for.
Put Dana on that committee if any of you city officials are paying attention to those.
We need her other places.
That's fair.
There are a lot of people who have applied to participate, trust me. And it's very important that process happen, that selection process occur.
Absolutely. That's actually why this whole panel really came about, is Ben Wood and I started talking about that committee, and I chose not to apply because I need to sleep sometime. But yeah, and I heard that they're considering several options for things that are removed. One, put it in storage. Two, put them in long-term loan to whatever cultural organization, or gifting it to another cultural organization, or selling it, which is crazy to me. Respectfully, City of San Francisco, that's crazy.
Those who I know that work at museums are like, we don't want it. So it's funny to hear.
I mean, another option is to destroy it, right? That definitely needs to be an option. I mean, what is the point of having a committee evaluate any city's public art if destroying the work is not an option? I mean, for me, and I've said this already, that work still resonates energetically with hate, much of it, right? And exclusivity and denial of others. And that's the point of having this conversation, is so that we can clear space. We don't even need to clear space. The process for approving public art itself has to shift and change, so that there is, I mean, equity in art doesn't mean we all have to like it. Doesn't mean we have to get it. But it means something culturally to people that may look like you. And that's okay, because no one has cared all these hundreds of years, whether Black and brown folks and other people of color like a monument of Goethe. No, I don't. And I don't even know why it's in the park, but it is. And that's the consideration, that's the opening people have to find themselves in this space where, you know what, it isn't, at least for me on the surface, but I learn something. And that's why the murals in the high school, like, how in a high school are we not having conversations around all of what you're talking about, Ben? It's a gift to the school and to the community to welcome conversation and hear different points of view and sit with that. So I don't know that I want to see an interpretation of the art by someone or some group that I don't necessarily know if I can trust, right, that interpretation. I mean, I think the truth of history is ugly. And if they're really worried at that high school about the kids being desensitized to violence, then they need to turn their TVs off and get off their phones and stop playing. What is that game with the cars and you kill people? What is that? I don't even know. But I mean, desensitized by art. They need to be enlightened by art.
Yeah, that's the beauty of art, right? That's the beauty of art, and the challenge of history is truth is kind of a subjective term, right? Everyone has their own truth. Everyone has their own version of history. Everyone remembers things differently. And so that's the hard part about being a historian, is trying to sift through all the different narratives and find an evenly presented approximation of what happened. You had mentioned, Dana, about having the option to knock them down, which is controversial for some, not for others. And actually, we had a great comment earlier. Aurora said that you could melt pieces down like Benny Bufano did with his sculpture at City College, where he actually melted weapons down and used it in the piece itself. So that is a wonderful way to sort of reconceptualize and reuse monuments that are no longer relevant in a contemporary environment. And hopefully Dana can get back. She's back as Ben Davis.
What's going on there?
This is what I do in every Zoom. I accidentally unplug my computer and it dies on me. So sorry about that. As soon as it gets back up, I'll get off the phone.
That's okay. We're happy to have you however we can get you.
Seriously, I can't tell you how many times I do that.
And Davis has never sounded better.
It's interesting what you said too, Dana, about what is the authoritative voice? Like, who is the source we can trust to interpret any given history? And personally, I think there is no one person, right? Like, that's maybe why there's no one San Francisco History Museum. There's just a bunch of community history organizations, because they understand their neighborhood. They understand their cultural district. So maybe Ben would, it's not just you designing one overlay, maybe it's continually refreshed where the students could get involved and they could add to your app or whatever sort of
Yeah,
overlay.
no, I agree that, yeah, obviously history, it's not a fixed thing, and that we all should have the agency in telling this history. So how can we all participate in that history telling? One idea I have is that we could have a civic group, or maybe a series of civic groups. Maybe it's Ben's group, or maybe it's the Western Neighborhoods Project that can participate in a more quickly to engage with a series of interventions around the monuments, to have these conversations. Maybe even on a more grassroots level. It might be easier than working through the bureaucracy of the city. So that's one idea.
Yes, I mean, there's benefits to being a teeny tiny neighborhood history organization. You can just throw a panel together and talk about important stuff with a bunch of cool artists in like 2 weeks. Well, I want to be mindful of everybody's time, so let's actually get into and talk about more of the monuments and why we're here, because we've got more work to feature.
People have the right to live in free.
Again. Almost got it. I'm new to the videos and the PowerPoint. So one of the reasons why all of these discussions started happening, right, was because monuments have become not suddenly, but more audibly controversial within the last year. We had on Juneteenth 2020, several monuments that you see here were tagged and toppled in Golden Gate Park by protesters. So that's the Francis Scott Key Monument on the left, which we've been speaking a lot about this evening, and we'll get to more about in a minute, as well as the Ulysses S. Grant Memorial and the Junipero Serra statue. And these statues did come down at a critical historical moment. And it's really hard to sort of suss out history as it's happening, but you can kind of see some ingredients at play. And I feel like we had been enduring just hundreds of years of systemic racism, and then we endured months of a pandemic that just sort of brought everything to the surface for us. I think it really gave space to think critically about who we want to be and who we have been, and it provided the catalyst moment that we needed. And I really believe that history moves in mysterious ways that we can't always see at the time. And it really struck me how we had Black Lives Matter protests that were emerging, with protesters holding signs that read "I can't breathe." At the same moment, people were struggling to breathe and struggling for life on respirators from this virus, from this pandemic. And as a historian, I call that alignments, right? That's what we do, is we look for patterns in history. We look through time and try and pull out the moments that define us. And clearly, for me, America, as we have always come to understand her, is kind of on life support too. And in many ways, I think that this concept of America that many of us have subscribed to, has been this self-perpetuating myth, one that's been polarizing and one that's been frankly debated since before the country's formal founding. And that's because I think it's a human trait to want to build our own narratives. So let's look at how this narrative building, this constructed narrative building, has played out in these monuments. And as we go through, we sort of touched on a little bit already, but as we go through these, I want you to think about the important questions we need to ask. Annalisa actually already kind of brought this up, but I'm going to hammer it home. It's not just about looking at a monument and going, who is this person? It's about asking who commissioned it. It's about asking who created it. Why was it put here and not somewhere else? What does it say about San Francisco in the past? And what relevance does it have to San Francisco and San Franciscans right now? So let's look at the Junipero Serra monument to start. So just for a little bit of background, Serra is known as the father of the mission system that really provided the Christian backbone for California, which is a point of pride for Catholics and also a point of intense pain for Indigenous communities. And this is history we've been questioning for a really long time, right? I mean, I'm 36 years old. Look at how the whole mission system was taught when we were kids versus how it's taught now in school. So we are moving towards the path of getting better about a full spectrum of history, but we're not quite there yet. And this particular statue was requested by Archbishop Reardon of the Catholic Church. It was paid for by former San Francisco Mayor James Phelan and sculpted by Douglas Tilden. Now, Phelan, he had a really heavy hand in the beautification of our parks. He was on the Parks Commission for a long time, and he loved Tilden. He was his favorite sculptor, so he allowed Tilden to put a lot of art in the park. Phelan is also a documented white supremacist, and please know that I'm using that language very, very specifically. When I say he's a white supremacist, I mean he ran for the state senate in 1920 on the platform of Keep America White. So him putting a statue in Golden Gate Park is him attempting to provide space for his vision of what San Francisco should be. And we're questioning his history here in San Francisco right now. In fact, Phelan Avenue outside of City College has been renamed to Frito Kahlo Way, because this is history that we don't want actively amongst the present. And I would love to hear, before we move on to the next one, I would love to hear if our panelists have any response to that, and give a look into the chat to see if we have any chat as well. I can also just move on to Ulysses S. Grant. All right, I think I will just move on to Ulysses S. Grant, who was another monument that was toppled. And Ulysses S. Grant, this piece was fundraised for by names that sound very familiar, right? We have Stanford, we have Crocker, men's names who are all around the city and California. And when they got together, they agreed that this would be made by Americans in America, which is a trope that we still hear today, right? Buy American. And it usually comes from the conservative parts of our country. And Grant they thought this would be easy to fundraise for. Grant was a former president, a hero of the Civil War. He was actively dying when they started the fundraising campaign, but because of that, numerous fundraising campaigns were happening all over the country. So they found it a little harder to raise the funds that they wanted. And they had this grand plan that was going to be a giant monument, and it got scaled way, way back. They did end up picking a Hungarian sculptor named Rupert Schmidt, who preferred to manufacture most of the pieces in Europe, where he was familiar. So right away, the original intentions for this monument kind of went out the window. And it was finally unveiled in 1896. And literally a few days afterwards, it was toppled by protesters from the Stonecutters Union, who were very upset that labor from Folsom Prison was used instead of union labor. So this is a monument that's actually already been toppled because of different priorities, because of a different environment, but controversial from the start, which just goes to show you that monuments seem to be a confluence of personal priorities. And those priorities change over time, which means that monuments that were relevant when they were put up maybe aren't so relevant anymore. And I'll get out of the way now to talk about the work that Cheyenne and Annalisa are doing, because this is exactly why what they're doing is so vital.
Thank you for the setup, Nicole. I will kind of build off what you said, I guess, because you hit a really pivotal point, and this idea of time, and this project really kind of serves as a zeitgeist of the time and what we experienced in 2020. So in 2020, actually a little bit of background. Like I said, I'm an artist and designer. I have been working on projects of cultural memory, and I'm actually affiliated with an organization called Monument Lab. And so I was doing a fellowship with them in the Goethe Institute in 2019. And we were supposed to do an exhibition in 2020. Everything happened in 2020 with the pandemic, and all of our plans kind of went out the window. So the opportunity to kind of create a project opened up with no limitations really. And like I said, my work is very place-based, and this was in March. This project was maybe January or February of 2020. And so wanting to do a project about San Francisco, thinking about cultural memory still, I was kind of just looking around me. And at the time, George Floyd was murdered. There was subsequent uprisings. There was topplings in Golden Gate Park on Juneteenth, as Nicole mentioned. There was secret removals of statues in the middle of the night from Coit Tower. There was the silencing of artist Lava Thomas going on by the Arts Commission. And then there was, with all this, with the tumultuous summer that happened, the city, at the behest of the mayor, came out and said, we're going to create a task force. We're going to study these monuments and the civic art collection in relation to our country's racist history. We're going to come up with some recommendations and everything. And then we're going to do a city report about it. The day is going to be saved. Being an artist, instigator, community-led person, I decided I was going to hijack that task force and the study, and do it in an irreverent way, do it in an approachable way, minus the bureaucracy, minus the red tape, very much in my kind of voice in the way I was writing the report versus a city report, which I could imagine being a little more dry. So the kind of the idea for the project was to, one, hijack this report they were doing. So I got the data for all the monuments in San Francisco and started organizing them into different typologies. How many male monuments to men are there versus women? In this picture on the left, you see much more men to the three women in the bottom corner. How many monuments are to colonizers? How many monuments are figurative versus kind of abstract? And so I kind of created a bunch of different groupings, typologies, and it was meant to be a little cheeky, kind of a provocation to kind of deliver this idea of what are we looking at in our city? What do we see in our public spaces? I followed this first booklet on the left with a public comment survey and asked City of San Francisco residents, one, to respond to this provocation, and two, to kind of give suggestions about what public art they'd like to see in the future. What hurt you about these monuments? What is missing? What haven't we honored? What story would you like to tell with a monument? I got the most beautiful responses to this survey, over 100 responses to this little survey. And we compiled it into a second booklet on the right. It's called Relic Report Volume 2. And the picture that you see here are the 6 recommendations the task force kind of came up with. And to talk about the task force, as I said, the city kind of came out and said we were going to establish a task force and do a study. We did the same thing. I reached out to people who I had worked with in the past. Shout out Lisa. I also cold called people who had been working on the topic in the Bay Area, people from the Huey P. Newton Foundation, people from MOAD, people from People Power Media, kind of grassroots organizations to form this alternative, counter, provocative, I guess, task force to kind of think about the same things. We delivered a report within 4 months, and as we kind of discussed, I think the city's actually still in the process. And through New Monuments Task Force, Lisa and I have been organizing and producing initiatives, low budget because we're grassroots, but different initiatives. I think the next slide talks about one of them.
Well, this is comments.
Oh, these are, okay, sorry. These are comments from that I just formatted for this presentation. Some of the comments of citizens of San Francisco who responded to our survey, and you can kind of see that there was a kind of a wide ranging, similar to the comments in this Q&A right now, a wide ranging kind of different responses. People think that loved what we were doing. We should be challenging monuments. In the middle and the top, there was kind of a lot of folks who said that we shouldn't have relationships with monument. They honor history. I was a veteran or something like that, you know? And so there was a wide ranging kind of response. We tried to distill it all into the report. I can drop a link to the report for the comments that I'm seeing right now in the chat so that folks can read it. But back to the initiatives, which I think is the next slide.
This one?
That's, no, there we go, thank you.
There it is.
There we go. So this is our recent initiative that we participated in early 2021. It's a 01 creative project. 01 reached out to me. They're an art and technology organization that does public art as well, longtime Bay Area organization. And actually, I think they have a history with Ben Davis on the Bay Lights project way back when, way before me. But anyway, they approached me, Shamshar Virk, who is the ED of 01, was also on the task force, someone who I basically kind of cold called because I had been connected to, but wanted kind of a grassroots, well-rounded task force, and he was gracious enough to join, and basically supported my vision to activate an important space. Like I said, my work is place-based. This site is really charged. We're talking about it right now. Dana's done a beautiful interpretation of with her work at the Francis Scott Key Monument. But what we did was did a augmented reality workshop with the artist Camilla McGrain. She's an amazing AR artist, I think responsible for the largest AR mural in America, but based in San Francisco. So we wanted to use the money we had to empower emerging artists, because that's also part of the equation that I'm thinking about with public art is the future. Annalisa and I, we called it New Monuments Task Force because we want to look to the future. And so I want to seed upcoming artists. And so we used our funding to pay artists, but also to kind of equip them with AR skills. No one went into the workshop with AR skills, and we used augmented reality to create, you can see images on this, this slide, but basically the artists kind of overlaid new kinds of interpretations of what that monument represent onto the edifice of the monument. So for example, one project, in the middle, you see a bunch of bison. Artist Jeff Enlow, number D, kind of created a project which reimagined the music concourse back to its very indigenous origins, and kind of just dropped a bunch of bison running around the music concourse because that's what it had looked like in the past. Someone in the workshop actually reckoned with Francis Scott Key, and he kind of destructed the monument and reconstructed it in different, I just saw a link in the chat for you to be able to see the videos. And for example, Hannah Scott did a project called Speculative History, where she kind of overlaid a kind of History Channel reinterpretation of General, his name is escaping me at the moment, but I will get back to that.
General
but anyway,
Pershing?
General Pershing, thank you. So
Yep.
he kind of retold his history from her perspective using augmented reality. Thank you, Nicole.
Yep.
And I see some drops in the chat. And so what I wanted to say was that this site was charged. We are, as New Monuments Task Force, coming at it from kind of very grassroots approach with the resources that we have, and basically using our resources to activate different monument sites and think about the future.
I just want to stop you for one moment and take a pause to say that in our Q&A, there's some comments from an anonymous attendee that are not welcome here. And I need to remind everyone that, like, we need to be polite, we need to be empathetic for each other, and we need to be open to different viewpoints. Throwing insults is not okay here. So that anonymous attendee can please leave. So I'm going to give you a minute to leave if you'd like. Okay. Now, let's keep moving forward with a constructive conversation. I thought I wouldn't have to say it here today, but I did, and now it's done. So what I love about your work, Cheyenne, is that it's so open to all possibilities. It welcomes everyone. It allows us to walk through time and space. We can have the augmented reality in front of us, or we can put it away and we can still engage with the pieces in place. And I'm wondering how our other panelists feel about this approach to commenting on the monuments that are still in place. And I'll take us off share so we can all talk together.
I mean, I'll say it's a great, I think it's a great facilitator for conversation. You know, it's a good way to start understanding different ways to engage people in the space and some idea making. At the end of the day, you know, it's virtual, you're down here instead of up here, and it's the history that's written in bronze and granite that we need to figure out how we're going to address in a real way. You know, the Francis Scott Key Monument has been in Golden Gate Park for 133 years. First at the Tennis Center, then in 1906 by the Cal Academy. And it actually was put in storage for 10 years between 67 and 77. And so it does have history of being tucked away. And came back in 77 on July 4th, where it's been since 44 years. So, you know, it's interesting though, that I think it's a great way to get people talking, but I still want to see the transformation happen in the physical realm.
I would say that absolutely. I think that we should be pushing the boundaries, technically, physically, intellectually, about what a monument can be and what it might become. You know, what could happen if we use media to, like a prosthetic can amplify counter points of view, differing opinions and ideas. What I'm really interested in is moving beyond the traditional concept of what a two-dimensional, monument is, to imagine monuments that can be more actively engaged in the civic life of the city, and the communities that they're inhabiting, people that they affect, the communities that are inspired or repelled by them. How can we use these symbolic structures that we're sometimes reinforcing the status quo, or conversely encourage active participation in our civic life, the life of the democracy? That's kind of what they do. They're not ambient furniture. So that, yeah, I really support those ideas. That's what I'm, thinking we need to do with these monuments.
Well, it's interesting. I don't know about in the art world, but in the history world, we're always like, we got to get to young people. How do we get young people interested in history, which is boring and it's just about dates and exclusionary because not everyone's represented in history. And the phone is the thing that gets them in the door sometimes. We don't have a TikTok at Western Neighborhoods Project because I might be too old for it, but finding these ways like augmented reality, or Ben would, having augmented reality that kids can pull up on their phone, that might be a good way to engage. But I also agree that nothing can replace experiencing something in person. That's why I believe so deeply in the tangible history of artifacts and the power that they hold and the spirit that they bring to a space, which is what makes Dana's Monumental Reckoning so impactful, to walk amongst our ancestors, which I'm getting ahead of ourselves. But one thing that interests me, now I've been researching most of the monuments that you included in your walkthrough, the music concourse, is that a lot of these pieces were the work of a specific community trying to claim space, largely immigrant communities trying to claim space here in San Francisco. And what better way than to give the city a present that amplifies something important to them, like the one to two poets, the monument to two poets, which now I'm forgetting a monument name.
Schiller?
Yes, that was installed there by a German society that fundraised for it and fundraised for it through throwing giant German parties that celebrated their heritage. And then they were able to give this gift and make themselves visible in a park they visited every day. And obviously the demographics change over time, and we need more of that. We need more communities given space in the music concourse and beyond. Even with the Pershing statue, it had an immigrant story connected to it, even though it's a general in the US Army. But yeah, what else can we add here? We're adding augmented reality. We're adding interventions around monuments. What else could we add? We've gotten some recommendations for, I just saw one in the chat, a monument to add to David Miles Jr. in Golden Gate Park on 6th Avenue and the Skating Place. I think that would be amazing. How could we get him to move though? He'd have to be able to skate, or else it wouldn't quite.
For those who visited the Monumental Reckoning sculpture, you'll see an overtly bold gesture of 4 QR codes that are on all 4 sides of that plinth, which is an interesting way to sort of, I'm going to be careful with this language, but not careful enough, a little bit of sort of disrespect and redirect history. The moment you point your phone at it, a different reality comes up. which is an interesting, and you watch people at that space and you see it taking effect. This moment they lift it, they're like, wait a second, and they've gone down to this other space of storytelling.
It's true. Oh, go ahead, Dana.
Well, I was just going to say, I'm a classical figurative sculptor. It's what I do. I see in the chat that, there's a recommendation that we no longer honor individuals. And to that, I would say that we're human beings, and we should see ourselves out in the world doing good, having done good, having survived and thrived. But I do think that there are ways to incorporate new technology. For example, the QR, I never call it the right thing, the QR code. I think there are ways to incorporate programmatic additions to monuments. We already have a women's group that is going to have, they're going to have a circle at Monumental Reckoning. And I feel like there are ways to enhance the beauty of any type of artwork when the public can be involved and bring themselves to the work and expand on the concept that resonates with them, or use it just as a safe place to be. I mean, I'm 61. I'm the oldest one here because I'm older than Ben. But I've waited a long time to see my history in public. And I'm a public sculptor because that work is free, right? I'm grateful to SF MoMA for taking the Diego Rivera mural and conserving it, but people have to pay for that now, right? Free to me is everything. I'm not trying to have my work in a museum. I'm probably eat my words someday for saying that, but I'm really not. And because it offers a way to contemplate the work. I think when you choose how you want to spend your time with it, as opposed to, okay, get in line, we've got TikTok, we've got to get through, and then come back and revisit it. Anyway, I say all that to say that I believe that there are ways to engage the public with technology and in the most ancient way of producing art, which is the lost wax process. And by bringing programs to the work.
I'm a big fan of and, I'm not a big fan of or. It's kind of how I feel about it. And I couldn't agree more about keeping the work free. I mean, this event was free tonight. I have a hard time charging people for history because I very much subscribe to the diggers ethos of like, it's free because it's yours. But like, also we have to pay our rent and I need to eat. So it's like, it's hard. But yeah, I totally agree with what you're saying, Dana. And what you do, Cheyenne and Annalisa, what you've done with New Monument Task Force is allow everyone to claim a piece of moving the conversation forward. And I mean, I saw a couple of my comments in print and I was like, oh my God. I've been chosen. Someone heard me. I feel like I just say all these things to my bathroom wall. It's amazing.
I was gonna add, I love that, Dana, like the work being free. And I mean, if a museum does approach you, I hope you say you do at least have entertained that conversation. You got bills to pay too. I encourage y'all, like let's be realistic, you gotta pay rent somehow, especially if you live in the Bay Area. But that also creates opportunity for works to continue to be free when you have that. It's a really much a unison circle. As Ariel was talking, I just think about the spirit of the work doesn't exist if the people aren't there. And if the people aren't there and the work doesn't, I mean, if I'm the people or any of us are people that are going to a specific space and it doesn't speak to me, reflect with me, connect with me, call to me, I'm not going to be there. So it becomes not important. It doesn't, no. So what is the value or its reason to exist?
Oh, that's so true.
Take it, Ben.
Yeah, I see you
First of all,
politely.
well, I'm just saying, first of all, you guys, beautiful work on the booklet. I mean, we went through it and it inspired us as part of our rocket ship process. And just to also say, you know, one of Illuminate's ethical guiding principles is create nothing that requires paid admission. So it causes some constraints. I don't judge anyone else. Get it how you can and make it work. It's all fantastic, but we have an ethical approach to it. But I want to go back into the comment field, the chat field. Lava Thomas asked me a question and I'm honored. First of all, Lava, let's grab a cup of coffee and talk about it because the real story is a little longer and more complicated. But I just want to acknowledge that part of her question was, how did you guys do that so quickly? How'd you get through those bureaucratic hurdles? How did you make all that happen? How'd you even do the fundraising? Everything in 4.5 months. And it was a wild ride, but Lava, partly is on your shoulders for the work you did and with Dana's help and others to sort of set the city straight and put them on notice a bit. And I think, you know, we're always building upon previous successes and where people have successfully championed for what's right. So thank you. And honestly, let's go grab a cup of coffee. We'll sit with the ancestors and I'll sort of try and share with you, unless Dana does. I mean, part of it's chosen to work here for 10 years. We have relationships. We're sort of a bureaucracy whisperer. I was a bureaucrat for 8 years and sort of understand how to get people to see what's in their best interests and work on something bigger than themselves that has a gift to the public, and yet they get no more money, but they have to take on the paperwork. They have to find a way to take a system that's designed to say no and find a way for it to deconstruct it and reconstruct it so it can say yes in a short amount of time. It's a very interesting process.
I always say, how can we find a situation where we can solve everybody's problem at once, right? Like with the Cliff House collection auction, and we're working on trying to do a pop-up museum in the Cliff House now that solves a National Park Service problem, that solves a Western Neighborhoods problem of where do we put this stuff? But anyways, I feel like it's time for it to truly introduce folks to Monumental Reckoning. Dana, do you want me to play the video or do you want me to just move on through into some of the photos for you?
I say play the video. It would give people an idea, but I also want to first, can I ask Cheyenne and Annalise a question about the work that you're doing? Is obviously it's for the public to engage, but I'm wondering if there are other systems that you're hoping will engage, you know, that are already established and that need to be, you know, broken down.
With Relic Report or what we're doing with New Monuments Task Force?
Well, everything, but the New Monuments Task Force specifically, yeah, but no, everything. I mean, there are systems that are established that make these decisions, and your report is it moves the conversation in a way that I'm not seeing.
Right.
Really, and that people are trying to have a conversation all across the country, right?
Right. I don't know if I should say this, but it's the project, kind of the audience. We struggled with this in the beginning because it felt like in the very beginning, the audience was directly to the city and kind of calling out injustice that we were kind of seeing, calling out red tape that was kind of inhibiting processes with public art. And I think by the time of the second report, we kind of we reshifted, and it was an internal conversation, like, who's our audience? Are we talking to the city, or are we talking to like the community of San Francisco? And I think that's why the second booklet kind of laid out almost a map, while the first booklet was really a provocation of city government. This is something we're like working with now, like how do we exist outside of institutions? It's something we struggle with a lot because, you know, we're grassroots, but also we have to pay our artists that we work with, pay ourselves, and it's part of working with institutions that kind of an issue we come up against. We are, I guess, in terms of San Francisco, similar to you, we're interested in also participating in that committee. And so this is something I wasn't gonna announce today, but I guess this is like the perfect time because of the question. But I view it as an opportunity to do exactly what you're asking, something that we're interested in having a larger, longer impact versus, like, I think we were really successful at being an instigator and opening up the conversation. I think the question you're asking is like, how do you change things long-term? How do you become part of the process long-term? I'm really kind of admiring what happened in New York and how they kind of handled their public outreach process and kind of came to the conclusion that there was no conclusion, you know? And so that's something we're working on. And that's something we're also building organizational capacity at the same time that we're also trying to kind of like poke at the sleeping giant, you know? So I don't know if you have anything to add, Annalisa, but it's a equation we're figuring out. But I don't want to only do things outside of the institution, outside of the city government. I think it's inherently, what we're doing is inherently tied to city government. Mm-hmm. So yeah, it's a process we're trying to work through it by also becoming part of this committee process that you are trying to become part of. That's the thing on our plate at the moment, so.
Dana, we were literally talking about this earlier today. All this stuff about where we're going, what's next, what are we doing here? And heavy questions. And specifically for the committee, I always say I've always had a little toe with city politics, and I'm scared to get in the pool. But it's too cold in there sometimes. But it's also really important to be in the room. Somebody has to be in the room, mm-hmm. or at least be in the doorway. Like, we have to be in there. And if they don't want us, we have to, hello, I pay taxes, you let me in. Like it, and it's really important for people to be in it and to have this. And I was expressing to Cheyenne that it's like the real work is really going to come out from the committee. And the real work is from that committee is when they actually hammer hard and hold our city accountable. Mm-hmm. Make the changes that need to be made. I guess the hard question is, what are those changes? Do we even know what we're asking for? And yes, we're still in conversation. I actually believe that the conversation is still fresh and new that we're having about monuments, mm-hmm. Because we haven't really gotten deeper into like what is a possible foundation of a solution, if anything. Is it a digital? Is it a physical? Is it this? Is it that? Is it, is it a painting? Is it not a painting? Does it belong in a building? Is it a person? Is it an actual, I think is it temporary or forever? What is forever?
It's going to be interesting. A part of me is concerned about this. I think it's exciting, and let's see what happens. But I'm worried about it as pushing us into deeper stasis and fear of creation. So it's going to be very interesting to see. I mean, Dana's work, for instance, is beautiful representational work. There's going to be this thing, well, you should never show anybody because all humans are imperfect, so never honor soul. And, you know, that's a choice, but that's a pretty damn fierce, restrictive choice. So it's going to be interesting to see where this discussion goes. And I hope you guys are on the panel for sure. If nothing else, just to make sure those voices are heard. But, you know, I hope it comes out into a constructive place that opens up rather than shuts down.
Ben Wynn and I were discussing how difficult it's going to be for anybody on that committee to come up with a set of rules that will apply uniformly, because every single piece is so reliant on context, is so reliant on the subject. Like each one has to be evaluated on so many different in so many different ways. It's not going to be
referendum every 40 years. We don't want to get it out of here.
Yeah, it's interesting that New York keeps coming up. I actually studied their Department of Cultural Affairs and how they structure their approach to cultural work and their assessment and how it gets funded. And New York's a real inspiration. They're a couple steps ahead of San Francisco with a fully formulated Department of Cultural Affairs that equally supports science, history, botanical museums alongside the arts, where we just have a director of cultural affairs, but really we just have an arts commission still. We haven't elevated it to the next level to support more comprehensive work. So definitely keep an eye on what New York's doing with that Teddy Roosevelt statue. I think it can be a good example of what we can do here. I would love to know more about their process of assessment. But let's move into Dana's work now. Ben took care of the Francis Scott Key history for the most part. Thank you, Ben. We can keep moving forward. Oh, I will just say though, why is there a monument to Francis Scott Key in the middle of Golden Gate Park when he had nothing to do with San Francisco and he's a huge racist? That's because of this man, James Lick, who was a noted capitalist here in San Francisco in the 19th century. And James Lick loved San Francisco. He also really loved James Lick. And when he passed away, or when he had a stroke actually in 1874, he put together a will, and that will stipulated the funding of many things. The Lick Observatory, for instance. He loved to name things after himself. My favorite, the Lick Old Ladies Home, which is here in the center. Not making that up, that's a real name. He also funded the California Academy of Sciences, the Society of California Pioneers, and the Lick Monument, the Francis Scott Key Monument, because he had a connection to Baltimore. He was actually at the siege of Fort McHenry, which is what inspired Francis Scott Key to write the Star Spangled Banner. So, and what does the city do when a rich old white man donates a monument? They're like, put it in the park. And he has moved around a lot. Ben's not kidding. It was over here by the tennis courts, and then it was damaged in the 1906 earthquake. It was the last monument to be repaired, and they stuck it over here in the music concourse, and then they moved it when Cal Academy expanded. And San Francisco didn't care. They didn't care that it was removed from public view without any kind of formal process of review, which was the main criticism for how Francis Scott Key was pulled out of his White Tower, is that it wasn't done properly. He disappeared without any kind of formal review. But again, the history says that San Francisco hasn't historically cared about this statue until right now. So why is that, right? It's an interesting conversation to have. So without further ado, this video, by the way, Dana and Ben, gives me chills every time I watch it. So everybody get a sweater because this is going to be amazing. Every time. Gets me every time. So who are these ancestors, Dana?
They are my great-grandparents. They are my story is no different than most African Americans. We don't know where we come from, but hopefully we know who we come from. And my great-grandparents were enslaved. And people say, how's that possible? Great-grandparents? My dad was born in 1918. His parents were born in the late 1800s. Their parents were born in the late 1700s. So these are all of our ancestors. These represent the ones who came shipload by shipload, who died, who gave birth to babies who were stolen from them and sold off, gave birth to babies who were the children of their oppressors. They're all women. The ancestors that encircle the plinth are all women. And they're women because of that. They're women because their loss was from their bodies. They were invaded physically, and their loss immeasurable. It's not a terror competition between men and women, but just something. It's just something more. To watch your child for the last time. $350 seems like a lot, but we can encircle that plinth with thousands of these ancestors because of what they represent. Our history is horrible. It's unforgivable. But we march on. And we ask so little that we even have to ask, why were we treated so inhumanely? I believe in narrative. For me, as an artist, I can't do my work without it representing actually initially, my story. Those braids remind me of being a little girl sitting with my grandmother, Phoebe James. And she had long, white, beautiful hair. And she would braid it in one braid every night. Every night. Those are her braids. And those are the braids of all the women who sat in every kitchen down through time and done another woman's hair, a child's hair, and shared stories and gossiped and laughed and cried together as Black women. My mom used to braid my hair every day in 2 braids, straight down. The fastest braider I have ever seen. And I tried to honor her as well. So the narrative is my story, but it's all of our stories. All who descended from people stolen from somewhere on the continent. And they have a job to do. You know, like the Sufi poet Rumi said, wherever you stand, be the soul of that place. They are now the soul of this of the space that for more than 130 years resonated with hate. These ancestors are working that space because it's their story we need to center, not Francis Scott Key. I am grateful beyond measure that Ben called me. I really don't know where this came from, other than it woke me up in the middle of the night. And I mean, I'm a figurative sculptor. And yes, those are figures, and yes, they represent women. But they're the different materiality and different physicality than the work that I do. But the essence is the same. The essence and the dream and the hope is the same in all of my work. When they were installed, we brought flowers for the libation ceremony. And people turned around and took those flowers and put them in their hair. And that could not have been a more perfect moment to this installation, to this dedication. It hasn't even been a week, and this week has been it's been a dream to be able to speak this into reality. And I thank you, Ben, for calling and allowing me to answer the call.
I think we all thank you both. I mean, if people haven't come to see this piece in person, my poor iPhone photos do not do it justice. I can tell you that right now. And the ceremony, can we talk about the ceremony for a second? The dedication ceremony? Oh, I'll get it. It was wonderful. I mean, it was your message of unity and finding commonality in a complicated, sometimes divisive past literally brought me to tears in a public space, which hasn't happened in at least a year. And it was just so beautiful. Can you explain what we're looking at here, Dana and Ben, since you had a much better view than I did?
Well, our first speaker was San Francisco's poet laureate, who is phenomenal.
Mm-hmm.
Congo.
Here.
Tongo Eisen Martin, just so you know his name. He's on the first year of his 3-year poet laureate run.
Yeah, he was fire. He was amazing. The mayor spoke very passionately about public space and representation. You know, I shared that the ancestors were made by me and 12 women. 12 women of all different ethnicities, African-American, Afro-Samoan, Filipina, Mexican-American, Chinese, white. There was a young Irish girl who talked of her ancestors' struggle, famine and war, civil war, and they brought their ancestors to our ancestors, and it always felt like it felt like a party of ancestors when my space was full of the women, and one Mexican American said to me, "This is inherently not my story, but I understand struggle and pain and terror. That if we all sat around the table, we could share those stories and we could listen to other people's stories." And that's what my hope for the space around the ancestors is, that we will talk to people that don't look like us, that we will listen, and we will rise above division that is intentional. Division in this country is intentional. It's in order for us to hunker down and hate. And I don't think my ancestors want that. Mine. I don't, because none of us will survive if we continue to propagate the master's house and build it.
Mm-hmm. I think that's what's so incredible about all of your work, is it comes from such a genuine place of absolute love. And I mean, there's so much positivity that radiates from everything all of you do, even though it is disruptive, even though it is challenging dominant narratives. And for me personally, not to take this to like a therapist couch moment, but you know, I'm an only child whose parents have died. I'm not religious, and the experience I had at Monumental Reckoning felt like a communal church moment. Like history for me, art for me is the sort of religion that builds a community that I don't get from other places. And I saw that happening in real time at Monumental Reckoning amongst an incredibly diverse crowd of people, joggers who never intended to show up and then just hung around, folks like us, folks like everybody on this panel. We just all were in it together. It was a really beautiful moment, especially coming out of the pandemic.
It felt like a reunion. It felt like a family reunion. I think that was one of the first things I said, was that missed you all.
And I want to just tack on to the act of creation from the beautiful crew that Dana had making those bodies. There was a whole other crew of people. Phil Ginsberg, his incredible leadership, and his generous team in Golden Gate Park. Ralph Remington, who I think is in the chat, helping us work in a way that was constructive after, frankly, a rocky start because of the aggressive nature of our idea. But it helped us come up with a stronger project, and we went together on this project in a really powerful way that I'm extremely grateful for.
I think the other commonality, besides the intense research and love you all bring to your work, and I hope I fit that category too, is you all just say yes. This is a room filled with yes people. I'm seeing a lot of yeses in the chat too. This is it's silly to say, but yes is so rare these days. There's so much no out there.
That's true.
Yes.
I mean, that's when Ben Wood and I started talking, and we were both just like, oh, this person's here for it. Like, same with Cheyenne. When we started talking, we were like, oh, like, yeah, let's do this. Whatever you want to do, let's do it. And now, Ben and Annalisa, I've always known that about you, working side by side at CHS. And now I know that about Ben Davis and Dana King as well. We have an amazing kind of, maybe the exclamation point on the end of this evening, but someone has asked, Maggie has asked, don't let up, keep on doing what we're doing. She loves what she's hearing tonight and wants to know how the general public can help us as artists, as historians, do the work that we do. And I'm going to shamelessly plug that you can donate to many of our nonprofits and our organizations. In fact, if you donate to Western Neighborhoods Project right now, that money will get split up between everybody here on the screen. But also you can just share our work, talk about what we're doing, come to what we put on. Nothing sadder than throwing an event that has 3 people that you already know at it. Go out to Golden Gate Park and see Dana's work, see Ben's work. I believe, Ben, you also have a public hearing committee or public hearing coming up for your work.
This it's pretty inseparable, the ancestors and Let There Be Voice. They are born from the same idea and thread. And when you visit the ancestors, you'll feel the reach and the pull across from the Temple of Music, this beautiful structure built out of sugar plantation labor. And the Historic Preservation Commission wasn't quite understanding fully the power of this work. And so Mayor Breed pulled it for a month and we'll be on the agenda on July 21st. And people's letters are welcome. If you go to monumentalreckoning.org, we sort of made it easy for you to send a letter, but it's not too hard to figure out. And we want those letters actually not be kind of a form letter you click, but a real story, the chance to reveal the soul of this project. What does this song mean to you? What would it mean to see these lyrics on the crown of this building?
Which there's always an opportunity for public feedback on anything you see in the public. Sometimes they don't make it super transparent. Well, they're like, promote that this is happening the day before it happens. Kind of difficult unless you're on top of it, but that's something else you can all do. You know, if you believe that something should be happening in a public sphere, make your voice heard, show up to those meetings, talk about what you want, talk about what you don't want. Decisions can only get made if there's information to make them from. I think that's what everyone here is doing so well, especially Cheyenne and Annalisa. You're giving information to the people who hold the power. And Ben and Dana, you're giving them the art that shows what can be possible if they say yes, which is also amazing. And Ben Wood, you do so many incredible things. Ben, we have to remind folks to go see your installation in Potrero Hill, working with Peter Linenthal, who's also been in the chat. I see you, Peter. We're all doing work all the time. So if
you can, yeah, just let people know on Fridays, Saturdays, and Sunday evenings from sunset, that's around quarter to 9 right now, until 10 o'clock, we have an installation in which we a projected piece on the home of Peter Linenthal above Christopher's books, sharing images recently found in a basement in Potrero Hill.
So, and this is Ben's blank canvas, of course. Not totally blank because you're responsible for how it's illuminated right now, but it is waiting.
It's beckoning.
It is waiting. And I think this has all been a great example of how history is not smooth sailing. Pardon the pun, I'm just a big fan of dad jokes. But it really isn't, right? These conversations are hard. We had someone in the chat who couldn't handle it, apparently, and just had to throw insults. Not okay. I understand your pain, but I don't appreciate the message. We gotta be able to talk to each other about these things in a polite way, in a way that makes us all feel safe, or else we're never going to move the conversation forward. We're never gonna be whole. So I want to provide an opportunity for all of our panelists to say any last words for the evening, while also extending my extreme gratitude for giving me your time tonight. I know, and all of us your time. I'm just blown away you're all here, and I appreciate you all so much.
Thank you for holding space, Nicole. It's been great.
great to have phases to the names. Thank you so much for all of your work. And, you know, it's this question about monuments and memorials. It's in the universe, and I'm hopeful that no, I'm knowing that the shift is occurring, and that that the narratives of those who have been othered will be the other narratives that we hear and see out in the public.
I like to say that history is happening and we're here for it. And folks like you just make everything so much more vibrant. Definitely make it a lot more bright. But yeah, and I hope, not to get on my soapbox as we end the evening, but I hope this is what this panel shows, is that history is not an isolated academic enterprise. It's something that happens with for all of us. It's part of the process of art. It's part of the things we walk by every day and take for granted or don't challenge. History is always happening. It's always around us. And especially on a Zoom program like right now. So with that, thank you again. I think we will formally end the program so you can all eat dinner or go on with your lives. And please email me with any questions, concerns, thoughts, feedback. I'll be emailing all of you tomorrow with a link to the recording of this program on the Western Neighborhoods Project YouTube channel. And I'll be asking for your feedback there as well. So email me, nicole@outsidelands.org. And with that, I will bid everyone adieu.
Everyone.
Good night, everybody.
Good night.